morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A warm welcome to everyone for day one of this YPO live event, the North America Summit, Embracing Volatility.
Talk about today, the changing consumer attitude. And just when you thought this is all overwhelming, there's another force that's evolving and growing up on the horizon, which is digital transformation, where future exposure of the regulatory compliance that's going to hold us about the carbon footprint will hold us accountable for agility and resiliency, and will hold ourselves accountable for the profit. How do we find that perfect balance? And I think the time is now. If we don't do this now, what you will see that about 30 to 35% of the S&P 500 companies will probably disappear by 2026.
Our post-COVID-19 network will be different. COVID has not been I call it the be-all, end-all, but more of a catalyst and accelerator of, correcting the sins and the challenges of the past 30 years and running more of a linear type of economy versus a circulatory economy that we built up with.
Is that we have to innovate fast, and we have to pivot even more quickly, and we need to know what kind of business we're in. Just our business is MRO, maintenance, repair, and operation. So when they call our organization, and GM is a customer, when they call, they're not calling to window shop. They're calling because they have a line down and they need equipment. So we have to gear our whole supply chain system.
And it's time to introduce the supply chain theme. I'm thinking through the different types of failure modes that are out there and the effects. Because the one thing we cannot do is apply a peanut butter spread around whether it's building inventories or buffers, changing the entire supply chain and building it all in one location. In fact, some of our biggest impacts this year have been driven by the US and the weather storms of the South that shut down the semiconductor industries. And so, it's not because of global supply chains.
One of the most important things, or an important thing leaders and folks should be considering as you look ahead to 22. So you start to do both less well or maybe mediocre. So I'd say making sure you're cautious and aware of what your capacity is to take on new opportunities, to start looking at new sources of supply, or potentially taking on large supply chain transformations, when in reality, there's probably a fair amount of effort that needs to be done to just stabilize your current incumbent supply base. So I would caution that as you start to look ahead as an important factor for 22 and beyond.
Well, this question has come in, and I think this is an appropriate time to ask for it, especially since, Carl, you're focused on manufacturing. And this question, it asks, what happens when inventory is perishable and it doesn't hold up long? Like, how do you think about your supply chain and disruptions that come from it when, you can't sit on the shelf for months and months?
Now, I would like to introduce our first panel of the day on supply chain logistics, my favorite topic in the world, moderated by Brian Berge. Brian, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Simon, and welcome everyone to the supply chain and logistics section of Embracing Volatility. The past 18 months, as we've seen, has been really nothing but volatility in air freight and ocean freight, imports, exports, global transportation, domestic, you name it. There's been congestion, volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and doubt. But the one silver lining in all of it is all of your competitors are operating in the same environment.
And one of the things that I think everyone on the in the audience needs to understand is that supply chains were not built for what we call massively disruptive events. So consequently, the thing that we've been trying to help people is you can have modulation within the supply chain as long as it operates in a band. And when you basically see modulations going outside of that band, you're going to have problems.
The second major trend that occurred, and this picks up on what Noel just said, in terms of zero distribution space being available, is that there was a massive shift from bricks and mortar supply chains to e-commerce. And when we go to the store and buy things, it's because the supply chain ended up at the store. But when we buy product over through Amazon or any other e-commerce channel, those goods typically don't go through the store. They just go through distribution centers.
And controlling for the environment. I mean, a number of innovative initiatives that you've implemented there locally. Can you kind of describe a few examples of what you've done to manage this record volume of 20 million TEUs?
Sure. There are really three major actions that the ports have taken to address the supply chain crisis as we see it here at the ports. And again, you know, the symptoms being ships at anchor, containers piling up in the terminals, not enough chassis, equipment shortages, and so forth. And again, it goes back to capacity, right? The level of cargo is far outstripping capacity. So what we've done is we've activated vacant land to serve as a relief valve for the terminals. And the idea here is get those containers off the ships as quickly as possible and push those containers out of the terminals as quickly as possible.
And you're not we don't expect anybody who actually has a day job to be following the vicissitudes of politics in mainland China. But the reality is, I think what's changed really dramatically since Xi Jinping's policy shift in 2015, Donald Trump kind of meeting, matching, raising, where we are today, is that commodities, which we thought had geopolitics was just far away from them, they're right on top of our businesses. And this gets back to this reshoring conundrum. The price of energy in the United States matters more and more, or certainly in North America. The Texas-Mexico corridor looks pretty interesting given the rich, different veins of energy sources in a world where sourcing in China, if we add a risk premium to that.
Expect volatility. If anything, it will be higher, not lower. And I think fundamentally, it's something most of us will just have to live with.
Inside your businesses, those people that are dealing with energy and carbon, that job has become more complex. That job has become more valuable. Do you have the right people in the right seats?
With the complexity of remote and COVID and all of those things, not ignoring proper remuneration, proper motivation, process, and ultra over communicating and collaborating from one of our previous panelists, I think is going to be key. Thank you, all three of you, for this really brilliant insight.